From the beginning.
And I was shown that that Lucifer would return, that the UN and the Vatican were going to be completely behind it, again, under false pretenses. He's going to show up and say, I'm here to save the day, right? And, okay, fine, you know.
Yeah, of course,
ahead,
you can say whatever you want. But I've always hated censorship. It's the internet.
Sometimes, you know, once they get you for your first love bite, well, it depends on how aware you are, right?
I forgot my bullets. I never had a gun. Here I am left standing. Am I the only one? For what I see, memories have guilted me. I'll never see the sun.
First of all, as you know, the Anunnaki and the Draco are enemies. Second of all, underneath Baghdad was a stargate that was created by the Anunnaki so that they could transfer from Jupiter to the Earth.
I'll never see the sun. I could just end it all, but the demons will have won.
Practitioners that, you know, some are good and some use their magic for good and to heal and to help, and others do use it for evil. And, you know, in some cases, you know, people really were
This is too much sometimes.
From the broken ruins of Babylon, this is End of Days Radio. I am your host, Daniel, coming all the way at you from the drizzly Pacific Northwest. Today we have Scott Allen Roberts, sometimes known as Scotty Roberts. Scott Allen Roberts is a researcher and author who has written several books about hidden history, some of which focus on my favorite topics, such as Nephilim and Reptilians. So this should be a pretty good time. The date is 2017, sorry. And if you enjoy the show, remember to stick around for after the break, after the guest leaves, because we have quite a bit to get into, quite a bit to talk about. I've got some letters from fans here. I've got some topics I want to bring up, and that new segment. Hopefully, I will finally remember to get to it today. But we will have to wait for that. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and call my buddy Scott Allen Roberts. Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Oh, wow, I got you on video. I actually don't need that.
Here, let me turn that off. It does that automatically when I pick up.
You do.
There you go.
You do look fantastic, however.
For sitting around on my computer all day?
Getting some work done, huh?
Tasty pallor of the computer light.
So, Scott, how have things been for you? It's been so long since we've talked.
I don't remember how long it is since we last talked, but things have been going all right.
Anything new in your world?
Well, as far as things I'm working on right now, let's see. When was the last that we spoke? Which book had come out? Was it Nephilim, or was it the Reptilians book, or was it the Exodus book?
The Reptilian one, because I remember that's what I got excited about.
There you go. So I had one book come out since then, the Exodus Reality, and John Ward, who co-authored that book with me. We are working on a couple of other books right now, and so that keeps us pretty busy. We were doing political talk radio and you had a pretty highly rated show with John Ward and Rocky Stucci called The Sit Room or The Situation Room. And we didn't get into a lot of mysteries and a lot of oddities and weirdness and paranormal and things like that, but we stuck to a lot of current event-driven type of topic-driven show. We had a lot of geo-global politics. We were talking about what's going on in the world. You know, a lot of people we get, especially here in the United States, we get myopic. We see the world around us right here in our backyards, and many of us don't even pay attention to that, and we realize there's a whole world that's driving what's going on here. And so we delved into that pretty deeply for a couple of years. And so right now got a couple of big projects in the works, other than just being a day-to-day writer, freelance illustrator and designer. That's my bread and butter. Got a couple of books going with John. The next one is actually a nonfiction. I'm sorry, a fiction, just the opposite. But it's a book that's meant to, in its origins, appeal to kids, but it's really a lot thicker and a lot heavier than that.
Okay, that's a departure.
Yeah, it's a big departure for John and I. I published a book back in, it was published by Morgan James back in 2008, and that was The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare. And it was an anthropomorphized story where all the characters were animals, dressed as humans and so on, and set in real history of the history between Mary, Queen of Scots, and the conflict with her cousin Elizabeth I of England, set in Tudor England, and or in Tudor British Isles, let's call it that way. And so John and I are working on a book very similar. It's called Fox and Bear, the Chronicles of Lord Braithwaite and Professor Tewkesbury, and it's a pair of friends. One is a fox. He's an aristocratic British fox who's an archaeologist, and his good friend Bear, who's an American history professor. And these two, the story's set in 1912, so a little over 100 years ago. And it's all the and in Egypt, by the way. So it's all the adventures these guys go through in this story. And so that'll be a very fun story to get finished. We've been working on that presently at as full speed as we possibly can. With John and their archaeological site in Egypt, and being gone half the year, and me busy with all the other things I'm busy with. So that's the next, I think, big thing that's coming out of John and I, is that particular book, even though we have a couple of others that we've been playing with as well. One was the 10 most adventurous places to travel in Egypt out of the pages of the History Trippers. That's John's and my experiences there. And that one was one that really our publisher wanted us to do after Exodus, and we said, nah, it sounds like a travel log. We're not going to write that kind of book. You know, we're scholars. We're going to write a scholarly book. And then our agent said, you know, you really should write that. And so we're working on that book. And we've also got another one that's not quite as in-depth as the other two as far as being done yet, but we're working on The Lost Armies of Cambyses, which is the story, the historical story of Cambyses, the Persian king, who in 525 BC sacked Egypt over, you guessed it, a woman, a grievance by a woman, and somebody's insulted here and somebody's insulted there. So he runs his armies to Egypt and sacks Egypt, kills the royal family, mounts a 50,000-man strong army of conscripts and anybody he can find. They're going to go march on the Ammonites over at the oasis of Siwa and destroy the oracle at Siwa, which is about 500 miles out into the western desert from present-day Cairo. And so he mounts the army. They head out. Army is never seen again. 50,000 of them. Herodotus, 4th century BCE, historians said they were all swallowed by a great sandstorm and the wrath of God, and they were never seen again. And this is still, to this day, it's one of the big mysteries out there.
Awesome. So, and what was it that, what compelled you to want to do a book on the Exodus? How did that all start?
Oh, the Exodus. That is by far, I wrote Nephilim. I wrote the Reptilians book, official titles, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim and The Secret History of the Reptilians. But I'd always wanted to write a book on the historical Moses and the Exodus. It's something I'd studied since, frankly, really my childhood days. When I was a 14-year-old kid, and I mentioned this in the prologue of the book, or the foreword of the book, that when I was 14 years old, I did a kind of comic book version of the Moses story in the Exodus. Very stereotypical, very churchified, very evangelical. It's the story you'd see when you'd watch the Ten Commandments on television or in the movie theaters 50 years ago, 70 years ago almost now. But that won me a scholarship to my church's school, high school, just by doing that. And I ended up going there, and then I went to, because of that, went to Bible college. Then I went to seminary after that, and all through all of this was the story of Moses. And I had written a paper in seminary on the educational system that Moses may have encountered in what I believe was the time period he lived, which was 18th dynasty Egypt. And so all through the years, this theme kept revisiting me. And when I wrote the book on the Nephilim, there was a chapter that was very dedicated to the historical Moses, because I said, when you look at the story of the Nephilim, there is one source point for the word Nephilim, and that is the Hebrew Scriptures. That's where it originated, the Old Testament. And now it's other places other than that, but that's where you find the term Nephilim and their original definition. And, of course, it appears in the books of Moses, the books that Moses was supposedly, historically supposed to have written. And, frankly, I don't see any problem with believing that a guy like Moses existed. I think the stories may be very different than what we were handed down in a book whose purpose was to really establish a couple of different things, the nation of Israel, and also that God was God in Israel. And Moses founded the Jewish religion in the sense that he was the first man to have codified Judaic law and Jewish religion. And so really, I don't think there's any reason to doubt that he existed, although many of his deeds may have involved other guys that were like an amalgam of who he became known as. But I wanted to examine that story, and I wanted to find out, is there evidence for the historical Moses? And we know in Egypt there's not a lot of evidence that you can find that you might call first-hand evidence, but there's a hell of a lot of second-hand evidence, archaeologically speaking and historically speaking, that sets a plausible stage. And so I looked into this, and then John Ward, who was my friend, who was a British archaeologist living and working in Egypt. And when we first met and got to know each other, I had started asking him, hey, you're an Egyptologist, and you live there. I said, do you happen to have any theory on the Moses story? And he says, brother, he says, you're cracking open a can of worms that I've been working on for a long time. And he had his own theory of the Moses story. And it's very interesting, while we have two different guys that we believe were Moses, they're both in the same royal house. They're both in the same 18th dynasty. They're about 3 generations apart. And a lot of the elements of the story merge once they leave Egypt. And so John was the perfect co-author for this book. And so he invited me to come out to Egypt. This was my first time, was back in 2013, January. And I flew out to Egypt. And I spent a month there, and we visited all these sites that were congruent with the accounts that we were putting together for the book. And we did our initial foundational research together. And the places we went and the things we saw were unbelievable. And because he's an archaeologist and also a man who's lived there for 16 years, well, 13 years at the time, 12 years, something like that, he knew everybody. There were a lot of these governmental officials with the Ministry of Antiquities that knew who John was, and so we were able to get to see things that the normal tourist wouldn't see. We went to places the normal tourist doesn't go. Back over 100 years ago, there was an archaeologist, Flinders Petrie, who had, for various reasons, and his research, said that there was a little mountain called Serebet el-Khadim in the Sinai that he believed was the Mount Sinai, or the Holy Mountain of God, from the Old Testament, from the Moses story. And it's not the traditional site where if you go to the Sinai today, which is very difficult to do now, even a few years since I've been there, because it's all overrun with ISIS. But if you travel out to the east side of the Sinai, there's St. Catherine's, the monastery on Jebel Musa, which is this big mountain that you see pictures of it all the time. Even as far back as the Charlton Heston movie, The Ten Commandments, the mountain of God was matte paintings of that mountain. So that's been traditional for hundreds of years, that's the place. But Flinders Petrie thought that was not the place. And even the ancient Israelites, by the time they were under Davidic rule, the monarchy, they looked back and they didn't even know where Mount Sinai was at that time. It had been lost in antiquity already to them. That was only a few hundred years later. And so Flinders Petrie said that this mountain, he believed it was the spot. And so John and I traveled there. And there was the sheikh of the region, Sheikh Barakat. He put us up in Bedouin tents out on the desert's floor. And he had his sons. I got up in the middle of the night. There happened to be a full moon the night we were staying there underneath this mountain. And we were going to climb up the next morning. And I'm out about midnight in the full moon. And the whole desert landscape around me was lit up almost like daylight because from the moon. And the sons of the sheikh were all wrapped up in camel hair blankets, sleeping about 20 feet away from the tent at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock away from our tent as hospitality and guardians and so on. And so we got up the next morning. We climbed this mountain at the top. It's a big plateau. And there is the old temple to Hathor and Ptah at the top that started in a cave. And then for 1,500 years, successive pharaohs built little chambers. Think about the size of your standard garage, one-car garage. They built these little chambers about that size out in a row straight out from the cave, all the way out to, I think it was Amenhotep. It was Ramses VI was the last one. And so you got all these little chambers, and they've all crumbled. There's no roofs on any of them now. But you can walk from room to room to room, and it's all crumbled from earthquake and, I think, man-made rubble. And you can see all the ruins and the statues that were in all these different chambers. And the goddess that the mountain was dedicated to was Hathor. And Hathor was the patron goddess of the miners. And all around the region where it was the turquoise mines, you can stand on the top of Serebet el-Khadim and look out over the rocky valley and over to the next mountain, and you see all the caves and the mines where they were mining copper, they were mining turquoise, and things like that out there. And so she had a shrine here on this mountain. Now, what's very interesting to the biblical story was that Hathor is the calf goddess, or the cow goddess of Egypt. And she's the bringer of fertility and happiness and protection and all these things. And when you think of the biblical story, it said that the Israelites were camped at the base of the holy mountain, and Moses had gone up and was gone for 40 days, and the people were wondering what happened to him. And they didn't really know him all that well. And I think there's a lot of portions of Scripture that show Moses was pretty much a lonely guy. He did what God said he was supposed to do, and he kept himself away from the people pretty much. I remember it says he pitched his tent outside the camp even. And so the people came to his brother Aaron, who was the priest now, and they said, where's this guy? You can read it in the vernacular. The text in the Bible says, where is this man Moses? He went up into the mountain and is gone. They say in the vernacular, if you translate that down, it's, where's this guy? This Moses. He led us out here. Where'd he go? He's up in the mountain. Build us a god, they said. So they weren't Jews by any stretch of the imagination, because Judaism hadn't been codified yet. Even though they had a Judaic form of religion they came from in the land of Canaan, they were now pretty much Egyptianized.
Scotty, real quick, I'm a little bit confused. Where did they actually really come from to begin with?
I believe that they came from the land of Canaan, what is now Israel and Palestine, that region. And that's where, according to the biblical text, it was... remember, there was Abraham, and he had his two sons, Jacob, and Jacob's son was, his son was Isaac. Isaac had his son Jacob. Jacob, another name for Jacob, was Israel. And that God promised him that he would be, of course, the father of the 12 tribes, and he had 12 sons. And this is where Joseph comes into Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, as the Bible calls it. And he comes into the picture, and he's the youngest son, and the brothers are all jealous of him. And he's actually the second to the youngest. And he's given this special coat of many colors by his father. Well, his brothers, they beat him, and they rip his coat apart, and they throw him in a pit. Then they don't know what they're going to do with him. And so they sell him into slavery. And they smear lamb's blood all over the cloak and give it to their father, so their brother was killed by a lion. Well, meanwhile, Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt. And while he's in Egypt, he becomes, of course, the chief steward of one of the houses, and he's arrested because the woman of the house, who is the wife of the high priestess, this is according to the biblical story. There's no real history to corroborate the story, but the place and the names and the people, they existed in history. She cries rape when he wouldn't have sex with her, and he ends up in prison, even though his boss, the high priest, knew he was innocent. He couldn't go against take a slave's word over his wife.
So this is like the original To Kill a Mockingbird.
This is just about. And so he goes to prison. And then eventually he's remembered. He interprets dreams while he's in prison. And the Pharaoh is looking for somebody who can interpret a dream. And they say, the chef says, I know this guy in prison. And they bring Joseph up, and he interprets the dream for the Pharaoh. And the details of the dream is unimportant for this story. But because of this, he starts getting elevated to high position. And the Pharaoh actually elevates Joseph to the position of Grand Vizier in the biblical story. And this is after several years. And Grand Vizier basically means Pharaoh in the place of Pharaoh. He was the most powerful man in the country other than the Pharaoh himself. And then there's the very interesting twist on the family tale, is that here's Joseph in power now, many years after his brother sold him into slavery. Well, who should come begging for grazing land during a time of famine in Canaan but his brother's family? And they're looking for a place to graze. And Joseph recognizes them. They don't recognize him. There's a little entangled story that goes on in there. And when Joseph finally reveals himself to them, he says, look, I'm going to give you the best land in the Delta region. They called it, in the biblical terms, they called it the land of Goshen, which was off to the east of what is present-day Cairo, in the very fertile areas of the Delta Fan. And he told his brothers, this is a very interesting point when I read this. I'd seen this story all the time, but this went right over my head. He said to his brothers, now, I'm giving you audience with the Pharaoh, who's going to give you this land, but he wants to meet you. And he says, when you meet him, he says, tell him that you are shepherds and that you've been shepherds from the days of your youth, because the Egyptians hate shepherds. And I thought, well, now wait a minute. Why is he telling him to tell the Egyptian pharaoh that they're shepherds because the Egyptians hate them? What good's that going to do them? But they go in and they tell him that, and the pharaoh gives them the land they want, and the rest of the story's history. Joseph and his brothers settled there, and I believe they built the city of Avaris, which was later named by Ramses II several hundred years later, called Pi-Ramses, or the cities of Pithom and Ramses, which the book of Exodus talks about. And so going back to Joseph, here's what I think happened. There was a group of people called the Hyksos, which is from an Egyptian word, which I can't pronounce off the top of my head. Hyksos, I can't even pronounce it off the top of my head. I can look at it and read it, but I can't pronounce it. And it basically meant shepherding kings or shepherding peoples. And the Hyksos were the people that over about 800 years, that they were what the Egyptians referred to as the Asiatics, the peoples that came from Palestine, what is now Palestine. It wasn't Palestine back then. Peoples who came from what is now Israel, people who came from Canaan, from Mesopotamia, from the Sinaitic region. All these peoples during times of famine, and sometimes they would just go down because the grazing land was better, and they would ask permission of Egypt to graze out in the Delta area. And eventually, over hundreds of years of this going on, these people worked themselves, of course, into the towns and the cities, and they eventually took over the governments there. Their people, in a sense, almost bred into the culture, and they took over. And now Egypt had two capitals. The capital in the south was what is today Luxor, or Thebes back then. That's about 500 miles south of Cairo on the Nile. That's where all your grand temples are. Temple of Karnak and Luxor and all of these funerary temples and so on. You go back up to the Cairo area. Cairo did not exist as Cairo, but about 25 to 30 miles south of downtown Cairo is the city of Memphis. And Memphis, or in the day, was known as Mennefer. And Memphis was the northern capital of Egypt. And a lot of the pharaohs would move up to the northern capital for the summer months or the winter months and so on, and they'd travel back and forth. And so the Hyksos were all living up in this delta region. Mennefer, or Memphis, or about Cairo now, really in the outskirts of Cairo now, was at the bottom, the base of that delta fan, where the river starts fanning out into the delta up toward the Mediterranean. It was right at the mouth, really, of the Nile there. And this is the city where I believe the story of Joseph took place. They built the city of Avaris over in Goshen. This is where the Hyksos came in and took over the northern throne. And they actually established their own pharaoh and their own Egyptian monarchy for about 108 years. And they did this out of Mennefer, or Memphis. And down to the south were the Egyptians, the real Egyptians, if you will, who ruled out of Thebes, or Luxor. And so for 108 years, you had a divided kingdom, because the Hyksos just came in and took it over. Now, what I believe you have happen when Joseph comes to power and his family is there, it has to be during that some point during that 108 years of the Hyksos rule. And I think probably fairly early on is my guess in the Hyksos rule, because I believe what you have happen is when Joseph says to his brothers, you tell them that you're shepherds and you've been shepherds from the days of your youth, because the Egyptians hate shepherds. He's saying you're aligning with the Hyksos, the people, the shepherding kings. They're our cousins, if you will, from the same region we came from and our family is from. And the real Egyptians hate us because we took over the northern kingdom. We're the shepherding kings, and they live down in the south in Thebes. So you tell this pharaoh, you're a shepherd and you've been shepherds from the days of your youth, because the Egyptians hate us. And so there is a clue as to the identity of these kings. So I believe Joseph came into the land of Egypt as a slave. He became the Grand Vizier. He brought his family in, and that during this time period when people groups from their region were actually ruling, had taken over northern Egypt. Well, then a few years down the road, you've got, in the biblical account, it says, and Joseph and all his brothers lived in Goshen. And it says, and after Joseph died and all his brothers died, and a generation had passed, a new Pharaoh came to the throne who had no regard for Joseph. This is what the biblical text says. And so he drove, it doesn't mention the word Hyksos in the Bible, but I believe this is none other than Amos the First. He is the Pharaoh who came in with his armies from Thebes and drove the Hyksos out of northern Egypt. And what's left? You've got all these family groups. You've got the family of Joseph there. That had come in at least 2 generations earlier. And they are thoroughly Egyptianized Canaanites. And I believe that you have this new Pharaoh, and it says in the biblical account, it says he had no regard for Joseph. I mean, he didn't give a rat's ass who Joseph was. And he drove out the Hyksos, and he slapped the rest of the remnant of these people groups, into either slavery or servitude of some sort, or indentured bondage of some sort, or just as the common workers. And so this is what happened. This is what I believe you have as the foundation for the Israelites being slaves in Egypt. And it was very interesting that this new Pharaoh, who's not named in the biblical account, but I believe was Amos the First, he said, let us therefore and this is a paraphrase, obviously. He says, let's slap these people into irons, lest they rejoin our enemies and take our land again from us. And it doesn't give you any historical facts. It just mentions that. That, to me, can be none other than Amos the First pushing the Hyksos out, driving them out, subduing them, enslaving the people left behind so they did not rejoin with those people and retake the throne in northern Egypt. And it's circumstantial, but it fits. And so then a couple of generations later, you've got the birth of Moses by the biblical story, and he is found by the Pharaoh's daughter in the Nile. And where she's bathing, which, by the way, there's so much, I just have to mention this, there's so much of this story that people try to push off as the mythology of Moses. And yeah, granted, I'll give it that. There's a lot of legend there, and there's a lot of story and a lot of enhancement, I do believe. However, you've got glimmerings of real history shining through. First of all, it doesn't tell you where in Egypt they are. When all this takes place. But we know by the people who I believe were on the throne on this calendar at this time that they were living in Memphis most of the year, and they'd go down south to Thebes for part of the year. And it mentions at this time that when Moses rises to power, comes back and asks for his people to be let go and so on, it talks about how Moses would leave Pharaoh's presence, and the same day, that same afternoon, would be talking to the leaders of the Jews. Now, if they're up in Memphis, and on the outskirts of Memphis, living in what I believe to be Avaris, or Pi-Ramses, as it's later called, it's a day's journey by foot from where the palace would have been in Mennefer, or Memphis, to the place where the Jews were living, or the Israelites. I believe that substantiates even further the plausibility that this all took place in the northern kingdom.
Okay, so this is like a mini sort of Israel that existed long before the actual. Okay, I see.
Well, actually, Israel didn't really exist at all yet. They were just Canaanites. They were, if you will, Bedouin tribes. The family of Israel, or of Jacob, his 12 sons, who came down, and Jacob came with them, and moved to Egypt when Joseph was the Grand Vizier. They weren't a nation yet. They were just a family, the family of Jacob, the family of Israel. And the 12 brothers and all their sons, it said about 70 of them moved from Canaan to Egypt in this family of Jacob. And they grew into exponential numbers. Nobody knows exactly how many. Some theorists have it at the time of the Exodus as high as 6 million or 4 million or something like that. I don't think there were half that many. I don't think there were a third that many. I think you're probably looking at a couple of 100,000 people that expanded from this family group of 70 over the next couple of 100 years to a couple 100,000 people. And they still were not a nation. They were, the Bible refers to them as the Hebrews. They were the Israelites because they were of the family of Israel, the family of Jacob. And it's this family group that Moses leads out of Egypt and into the promised land where they came from originally 200-300 years earlier. And that's where they really established nationhood is in the hill country of Israel. They couldn't conquer the sea peoples. I was just reading this, of all things, I was just reading this today in a book about establishing biblical history versus embellished stories and things like that. And it's talking about how the Israelites, when they came into the land after the Exodus, they had a lot of conquering to do, but they didn't ever conquer their constant enemies, the Phoenicians, which lived on the seaboard, or on the sea, the flats before the Mediterranean, and the Philistines were north of them. They stayed to the hill country, and that's where they lived. And so when Israel was in Egypt, they weren't a nation. They were a family. And they expanded into a huge family. If you remember, it was the Pharaoh who said, the Hebrews have grown too numerous. He said, they might join up with our enemies. Let's do something about that.
So because there were these other groups out there, like the Phoenicians and these other strong armies, Egypt was super paranoid because it's my understanding that they had been invaded by some of these other countries throughout their very long history.
Now, some of that is to be fair, some of that's a little later in history.
Oh, okay.
But Egypt did have a lot of enemies. And you can go to the wall of Shashank at Karnak Temple. And I actually saw this, and a good friend of mine, his name is Momin Saad, he is the director of all the work at Karnak Temple, which is a big complex, and he's with the Ministry of Antiquities. And John and I met with him for coffee one day, and he says, Momin, Scotty wants you to show him around Karnak. He wants some things he needs to see. And he said, make me up a list. And so I made him up a list, and I had 28 things on my list. And Momin took the whole day, the next day, a Saturday, and walked us around Karnak Temple Complex and showed me all these different things I wanted to see. And one of them was the wall of Shashank. And Shashank was I can't even remember the different versions of his name. He was a pharaoh who invaded from Egypt. He invaded the countries all around him. And he has a wall with all these different cartouches of all these kings and names of nations that he invaded over his reign. And amongst them is one that is Judea, which is very interesting, which is, of course, the kingdom of Judea was the kingdom of Israel. Now, they were a divided kingdom, Israel and Judea, but that is precisely what he conquered. And this was after the time of David and Solomon and those. And so, but it's right there in the Egyptian wall that he drove into the Middle East, and he conquered Judea and other nations along the way. And so what you've got now, when you go back to Egypt and Joseph, you've got the beginnings of the people of Israel living in Egypt, or as the Bible calls it, their sojourn in Egypt. And some say they were slaves, some say they were just the common folk that worked. Others said they were tied to the Hyksos by blood, and so they were subdued because of that by the Pharaoh, who kept them pretty busy. enslaved them, I think, even, to prevent them from uprising against him. And so you've got, this is the basic story, and this is what your original question to me was, what drew me to write about the Exodus? It really was a very prolonged draw in my life. From the time I was 14 until we wrote this book 3 years ago is when the Exodus came out, Exodus Reality. And that book is really a culmination of, for me, over 30 years of study on the topic. And so, you know what I was mentioning, too, was this mountain that John and I went to see under the protection of Sheikh Barakat out in the Sinai. And we drove out about 50 miles east of the Red Sea, and you hit Sarabat al-Khidim and Sheikh Barakat, and he put us up in the Bedouin tent. And up atop the mountain is, as I mentioned, the temple or the cave of Ptah and the cave of Hathor. She was the patron goddess of the mining, of the miners. And up atop is this old temple, 3,500 years old, 18th dynasty. And Moses, according to the biblical story, has gone up in the mountain, the holy mountain, for 40 days. So the people go to Aaron. Where's this guy, this Moses? And they said, make us a god. So what does Aaron do? He makes them a golden calf, which I believe was a representation of none other than Hathor, who is the goddess whose mountain they're sitting in front of. It makes perfect sense. And so this is where I believe they were encamped. This is where Moses went up to get the tablets of the law, where he carved those. And up top, what you'll find, the biblical account talks about these stelae of stone with the Ten Commandments written on both sides. And what you go when you go up to the top of Sarabat al-Khidim are these stelae all over the place. There was a community of priests that lived up there, and they would write things on tablets, stelae. They erected stelae that were in the different pharaonic chambers there that were scattered all around the place, standing, some of them still. They look like big gravestones, the old curved top gravestone. Some of them are 8 feet tall, some of them are 2 feet tall. But then we found piles of rubble up there of little ones that you could pick up like a book and carry them that were broken or shattered or something that, spoil. And they were just thrown off in a big pile when they were making some of these things. And we wondered when we were up there, is this where Moses met with the priests that he knew in his former life as a prince of Egypt? When he came back, did he go to this place when he led the people out because he knew there was a community of priests up there? When he wrote the law, was it something he wrote up there and put them on tablets and brought them down? Is this where, because this mountain was the mountain of Hathor, the calf goddess of Egypt, is this why they made the golden calf at the foot of this mountain? To honor the god whose mountain they were sitting in front of? I don't know for sure. But the plausible, or if you will, the circumstantial facts seem to point toward it. And so this, by far, where this part of this conversation started was you asked me about this Exodus book. This is definitely a passion of mine, and there's a whole lot more to this story. There's a whole lot more to who I think the real Moses is. It's different than John's version. I'm invested in my belief on this, but not so invested that if somebody came up with a better account and better historical facts, that I couldn't say, all right, I can buy that one over mine. But I think my theory is pretty solid, and that I know who this is and who the guy was, and it fits the facts, it fits the story, it fits the timing. Yes, all circumstantial, but this is where I talk about secondary historical evidence or secondary archaeology that can substantiate the fact more than just being able to just prove it outright. I think it substantiates the story very well.
Like you, one of my most earliest familiarity, the most familiar that I became with the story was from watching that Charlton Heston movie, The Ten Commandments. It was just so well done.
Me too. That's where I learned about it. That's the story that sticks in my mind forever. Is that Technicolor version of that? And by the way, if you ever get a chance to see that film, you know how they play old movies sometimes. I saw it in an old movie theater here in the Minneapolis area that still had the old CinemaScope screen in their theater from the 50s and the 60s. And that's what that movie was filmed in. And they showed it in its original, quote unquote. They showed it in Technicolor, which TV doesn't do Technicolor justice. You see that thing in Technicolor on a CinemaScope screen, it's the most astoundingly beautiful picture. Yeah, you'd want to see. The colors are so rich and vibrant. It's unbelievable. So I got a chance to see that. And, I went and saw Exodus, Gods and Kings, which came out a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, with Christian Bale playing Moses. And Joel, I can't think of his last name, playing Pharaoh, Ramses. They followed I thought for sure, because it's a modern remake, they're going to do not just epic-looking CG, but they're going to have a storyline that fits more of a historical story. And they really didn't. It was really a remake of the Charlton Heston movie, is what it was, with some updated stuff, updated CD, updated sensibilities, and things like that. They've got Moses almost in this book as almost a Braveheart type of a character.
How did the actor compare? Because Charlton Heston is one of the greatest of all time. Was the actor any good?
Charlton Heston is fabulous, but you put his acting skills up to modern actors, and if you look at old movies made in the 40s and the 50s, the Ten Commandments was made in 57, and you look at the acting in that, the acting in that movie is very theatrical, as opposed to the gritty realism of what you might see today. So the acting for its day was phenomenal, and Charlton Heston was good. Yul Brynner was fantastic. But the updated movie, I think the acting was better, but only if I qualify that by saying better, different. Meaning nowadays, actors are grittier. They get to the bare emotions and the raw part of a role. And I think you saw more of that in Exodus, Gods and Kings than you did in the Charlton Heston version, which was a very, if you will, sterilized, not meaning to use the word in a negative way, but a sterilized movie in the sense that it was Cecil B. DeMille presented that in a sense almost dripping with honoring God was the purpose of his movie. He wanted a movie, yes, that would make money, but he wanted something that would honor his tradition and honor his beliefs and honor the God who he believed in.
Yeah, one of the first things that I learned that was wrong with the original was Nefertiti was from a completely different time frame than.
Oh yeah. She didn't have anything to do with that story. Ramses, frankly, I don't think had anything to do with the Exodus story or Moses. Mm-hmm. The only reason that we ascribe Ramses, and by the way, Exodus, Gods, and Kings did the same thing. They used the Ramses II story. The only reason they do this is the book of Exodus talks about how the enslaved Israelites built the treasure cities of Pithom and Ramses, which we know historically were built by Ramses II. So the big question comes in, so the Israelites were his slaves. They built his cities. Or is there a different explanation? And the way I explain this is like this. Look at New York City. Who built New York City? And we would say, well, that would be the British. It's New York. Well, frankly, no. It was before New York. The Dutch had built it, and it was New Amsterdam was the actual name. And so you could say New York was built by the Dutch. No, it wasn't. The older city was built by the Dutch. It's that kind of historical extrapolation. This is what you have going on in Exodus. Keep in mind, when Moses lived and wrote the book of Exodus, and Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the Pentateuch, was around 1400 BCE, I believe, was when he lived, and when he wrote these books. Now, what's interesting is that the books we have, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are not the original books of Moses. These were all lost during the Babylonian captivity of Israel, some 1,000 years later, 900 years later than the time of Moses. And what you have is, once the Babylonians set the Israelites free and let them go back to their homeland, they went back, they built the new temple, but they did not have their scriptures. And they sent 72 rabbis to the Library of Alexandria, which, by the way, must have been a glorious place to I would love to, even though I don't speak all those languages, I would love to have been to visit the Library of Alexandria and see the knowledge that is all lost to antiquity that was there. But they went and they asked Pharaoh, and it was Pharaoh Ptolemy II, it was Ptolemaic dynasty, post Alexander the Great. They asked for his permission to go to the Library of Alexandria to recompile the Hebrew scriptures. And they had a twofold purpose for this. One was to recompile the scriptures and rebuild their religion. And two was to give Israel, reinstill national pride in their history. And so what happened in the mid-400s BC is that these 72 rabbis recompiled the Old Testament. And what we have, and Greek was the language of the day, by the way, the language of commerce. It was written in Greek. It was called the Septuagint or the Septuaginta. And this document is what is precisely the Old Testament you'll find in any King James Bible. Any Bible that's out there today that's in the English language is written from the Septuagint, which was written by these 72 rabbis in the 400s BCE. Now, the problem is, back then, they didn't have the technology recording the things that we can record today. How are they going to know precisely what was going on 900 years earlier to 1,000 years earlier, other than by oral tradition? And it is said that these 72 rabbis were given each a different cell, and they lived in these cells, and they each wrote down from oral tradition what they remembered of the Bible. And that's where we got the Septuagint. And then they, of course, looked up the scrolls and what existed there at the Library of Alexandria. And so when you get to the problem of Ramses being the pharaoh during the Exodus, these guys writing this story, they're saying, well, the Hebrews built the cities of Pithom and Ramses, or Pi-Ramses. And that's the only name they knew those cities by. It would be like some kid growing up in New York City today, never knowing that it used to be called New Amsterdam. And so what I think you have in that story in the Bible is they attribute the Exodus to Ramses because they're saying the Hebrews built his cities. Well, what it really was the Hebrews built the cities that are underneath those cities, and that is the city of Avaris, which dates back to the time of Joseph and the Hyksos period. This is the city that Ramses II, or Ramses the Great as he was known, usurped these cities and rebuilt them in his name. And much of what Ramses built was something that Ramses took from somebody else who built it before him, and he rebuilt it or expanded it and put his name to it. There's this thing, and it's interesting to see when you're there, and it's kind of an earmark of this procuring of older temples and older buildings and older cities. There's this thing called erasure And that is where most of the blocks that these temples were built out of were sandstone, dense sandstone blocks. And you could scrape off an old inscription and re-inscribe the new pharaoh's inscription on there. And then the next guy'd come along, he'd scrape off your inscription and put his own on. Well, what Ramses did, if you notice on a lot of his monuments, I got pictures of this, is that he inscribed his temples, his statues, and all this stuff about 4 inches deep. Meaning, if you went and tried to scrape off of his inscription, you'd have to scrape off 4 inches of stone to do it. And so he inscribed his inscriptions very deep, so people couldn't erase his messages. And but this is the guy, I believe, that he's attributed the Pharaoh of the Exodus when he's really about 200 years too late in history. And the cities that the Hebrews built were actually the city that lies underneath Pi-Ramses, which is Avaris. And they've started doing excavating in Avaris, and you can find Hebrew culture there. Hebrew, or if you will, Canaanite-style tombs, Canaanite-style homes, and some artifacts found. But the problem is in Egypt, if you start excavating and say you're looking for proof of the Exodus, you're going to get shut down. Because the Egyptians, I think they already know. The people in government, the Ministry of Antiquities, they already know. But it would be a political hotbed if they, in their way of thinking, were to give present-day Israel some claim to their land. And so they don't let those facts come out, and they don't let things be excavated, and they don't let them, the people that have excavated there have excavated under other pretenses.
Isn't there another connection there where the Egyptians, obviously, they're very interested in snakes, and then they found some really old snake pottery or something like that in Israel, buried real deep or something like that?
There is snake pottery. You will find that. Remnants of that all over Israel. You'll find, who was the pharaoh whose image they just found? I think it was Amenhotep the third or the fourth. Amenhotep the fourth was Akhenaten. To set a little time context for you, I think it was Amenhotep the third, his father, whose images were found in Israel just very recently. Little statues of him, and meaning that Israel already existed at the time, or people were living there who had come from Egypt, or somebody coming from Egypt had sold a statue there, or whatever it might be. And by the way, there are some really good ways to date the Exodus. When you're reading in the Bible, it talks about Solomon having built the temple, the first temple in Jerusalem, and it's referred to as Temple 1 in archaeology. And Temple 1, we know pretty much about when that would have been built by Solomon, because we know pretty much the years that Solomon would have reigned, even though there is some question about his existence. We know the time period, and we know that Temple 1 would have been built in Jerusalem right around 966 BC, give or take 3 to 7 years in either direction. That's how tight the date is down. And so in the Bible, there's a passage that talks about Solomon on the day he dedicated the temple in Jerusalem. 480 years had passed since the Exodus. So if we know that the temple was built right around 966 BCE as the median date for the temple being built, and you add 480 years and go backwards, you're ending up with roughly 1446 BC as the year of the Exodus. And you start looking at, you'd think it'd be as simple as saying, well, who was on the throne in 1446? Except there's 4 different chronologies of the kings of Egypt that exist from antiquity that show the kings all over the place, ranging from one chronology will say this pharaoh died here, the other one will have him living another 20 years, and so on, some things like that. And so the lines are all mixed up. And so if you go by, John and I, for the sake of the book, we went by the accepted Oxford chronology of the kings, which puts the dates pretty darn close to that 1446 time period. And what's interesting about that date is that seated on the throne in 1446 for about 5 years was a guy by the name of Amenhotep II. And Amenhotep II was 18 when he came to the throne, about 23 at the time of the Exodus by that dating system. And his father was Tutmosis III, whose father was Tutmosis II, whose father was Tutmosis I. And this was the Tutmosian dynasty. And in the 18th dynasty, this family. And Amenhotep II was the son of Tutmosis III. Now, Moses, if he was indeed, as the biblical account says, around 80 years old at the time of the Exodus, and if that date from the temple backwards is correct, and you have 1446 as the date of the Exodus, which is what I think is the date, and if Moses was 80, you subtract or add on another 80 years and go backwards, and you get about 1526 BCE as the rough birth date for Moses. And you look at who's on the throne at the time. It was Tutmosis I. He is the son of Amos I, or I think he's the grandson of Amos I, who sacked the Hyksos and drove them out. And Joseph's dynasty or family dies off, and the new pharaoh rises. It doesn't know him. This is Amos I. And a couple of generations later, now you've got Tutmosis I in 1526. He had a daughter who in 1526 was roughly between the years of 7 and 10 years old. And her name was Matkare. And she later became known as, her pharaonic name, or regnal name, was Hatshepsut. She became actually the Pharaoh of Egypt. And she dressed as a man, and she wore the little beard, the fake beard, and she ruled as a man because she was a woman in a man's job type of thing. I see Elizabeth I of England as being very reminiscent of her. Well, this girl was known as, in 1526, when she was 7 to 10, she bore the title Pharaoh's daughter. Now, that was not just a descriptor, that was a title. It would be like being called the First Lady of the United States of America. She was Pharaoh's daughter, and Matkare. And if you look at the book of Exodus, it talks about the woman who was the princess bathing in the Nile, and Moses' mother put him in a basket and floats him down the Nile with his older sister running along the shore, making sure he's safe. And they direct him right into the bathing area, the little pool where Pharaoh's daughter was bathing. And she finds him, and it says she takes him as her own. And then the story jumps 40 years, and Moses is 40 right after that. So we don't know anything in the Bible account about what happened in those years, other than it says that the young girl, the princess, the Pharaoh's daughter, said he has not yet been weaned. He's so young. And Moses' sister steps up and says, I know whose baby that is. And she says, I can have him suckled for you. And it says, so Pharaoh's daughter gave the baby Moses back to his sister, who took him back to his mother to be suckled. And she came and got him and claimed him as her own when he was old enough and she was old enough to claim him. Now, keeping all those facts in mind, if this is indeed the timeline, and if that is Pharaoh's daughter in 1526, and if Moses indeed was born in 1526, it is very likely that this is the person we're talking about. Now, go to Egypt now. I want to switch the gear on this just a little bit to provide a little more information from the other side of the coin. In the Egyptian story, there was a man that was raised to great power by Matkare, the Pharaoh's daughter, who became Pharaoh and took the name Hatshepsut. She gave this man 92 royal titles. She gave him his name. She named him the hereditary crowned prince of Egypt, the high priest of Amun, and all these different, like I say, 92 titles. He started out as the tutor to her daughter, the Princess Neferuri, and it was under the Pharaoh Tutmosis II, who was married to Hatshepsut. They were brother and sister. That's what they did in the royal lines. And he became ill. He died. This is when she took over as co-regent with her stepson, Tutmosis III, who was only 3 years old at the time. She became his co-regent, and eventually she just kept him as, she made him actually the general of all her armies, moved him up into Memphis, and she took over as pharaoh. This is this woman. Now, she had a man named Senenmut, who is Egypt. All we know about his origins is that his parents were commoners. That's all Egypt writes about him. His parents were commoners. He was born to commoners. And he came into the household of the Pharaoh's daughter, who became Hatshepsut when her husband died. And she elevates him to great power. And all we know is that Senenmut is the name she gave to him later in life. Senenmut means, in Egyptian, mother's brother. I, your mother, am bestowing upon you the right to become my brother and brother to the gods with me. That's what Senenmut means, mother's brother. And so here is this woman, this powerful woman who is Pharaoh, who I believe found him in the Nile as a baby, and she elevates him to great power. She gives him his name, Senenmut, mother's brother. I'm no longer your mother. You are my brother. And as a matter of fact, she has a love affair with this man, Senenmut, through most of her days. And Senenmut is raised to great stature. He also becomes the grand royal architect underneath Hatshepsut. He builds her great funerary temple of Der el Bahre. You can go see that. It's on this side, the east side of the Valley of the Kings in the mountain range. About 10 minutes drive from my friend John Ward's house on the west bank of the west bank of Luxor. We can drive about 10 minutes. You get to all these temples. Howard Carter's house, who found King Tut. You can go see Valley of the Kings, is another 5 minutes up the road around the mountain range. And so all of this is right there. He built a lot of that during his day. And all of a sudden, however, and by the way, he leaves behind 2 glorious tombs that he made for himself, but neither of them were occupied. And we find around the time that he would have been 40, he disappears from the Egyptian scene. Gone. No word of what happened to him. No word of his death. All we know is that Hatshepsut dies very soon thereafter. And her co-regent, Tutmosis III, who's now about 29 years old, comes to the throne, as is in his rightful place, becomes pharaoh, and he starts striking her images off of things. Some of her statues, her inscriptions, her images off of her own funerary temple. But he leaves off. He only does enough. It's like Erasure. He does enough to show, I am the pharaoh, and I'm taking over these temples, and so on. But he is also, through his whole life, through his 20s especially, he was the king, the general of all the armies of Egypt, but he never raised his hand against Hatshepsut, who was his co-regent, who took over the throne from him. I think he knew his day was coming, and I think she was peaceful, and I think that they actually kind of got along, is what we get from all of that. She took very good care of him, and he ran her armies and so on. So he comes to the throne, strikes some of her images. He rules for about 40 years, 38 years, I think it is. Then when he's old, he's gone from 30, he's only about 70 years old now. But think ancient Egypt. He's 70 years old. Starts to become old and a little weak and sick, and his son becomes co-regent with him for a few years, and that's Amenhotep II, who I believe was the Pharaoh of the Exodus in 1446. Now, what's interesting is that remember when Moses has his burning bush experience, and he's giving all these excuses to God, who, according to the passage, is telling him to go set his people free. And Moses says, I can't go back there. The people, they are seeking my life there. I'm a wanted man. Because according to the biblical story, he killed an Egyptian taskmaster, and buried him in the sand. And God said to him, all those who seek your life are dead. You can go back. And I think this is then after the death of Amenhotep III. Because I think what happens is this, and this is conjecture on my part. It's speculative, but I think it fits the picture. I think Senenmut, according to the biblical passage, Moses identified with his people when he was a prince in Egypt. And it said that he broke up a fight, and there was an Egyptian taskmaster beating an Egyptian or a Hebrew slave. And Moses stops the beating, and he murders the man and buries him in the sand. And then the next day, he breaks up a fight between a couple of Hebrews, and they said, what, are you going to kill one of us and bury us in the sand too? And Moses was like, according to the biblical story, well, apparently my deed is known, and he runs, he takes off, fearing for his life. Now, what I tend to think is more likely is that Senenmut was part of the Hatshepsut faction of government. Obviously, she elevated him. She was his lover. There's even graffiti. There's pornographic graffiti on one of the walls in a cave above her temple, way up high on the cliff walls. And I've got pictures of it. It's very cool. But they said that they were lovers. I have a feeling that there were factions in the Hatshepsut government, just like there were factions think of Queen Elizabeth. She had Norfolk, who said that he was the rightful king, but it was hush-hush, he was quiet, he couldn't come out and claim it, but there were factions rising. There were all different kinds of factions in her government. Look at our government today. There are factions in our government. I think it was no different in her day. Even though she had a pretty peaceful reign, I tend to think that there were factions that were pro-Hatshepsut, factions that were pro-Thutmose III, and probably everybody else in between. And I think that what you probably have happen is that Senenmut, being the chief grand architect, murdered somebody. It said a taskmaster beneath him, probably somebody who was part of the Thutmosian faction. And I have a feeling that the intrigue is a little thicker than the Bible lets on, and that Senenmut fled because Thutmose III started coming to power, because Hatshepsut died, and he takes off, and he leaves. Now, 40 years later, he comes back. Remember how I told you Thutmose III, when he took the throne, he started eradicating the images of Hatshepsut, but then left off.
Mm-hmm.
Now, his son, when he comes to the throne 40 years later, 38 years later, finishes the job. He eradicates all throughout the land of Egypt every image of Hatshepsut, every statue of hers that he could find. There are still some that survive, thank goodness. But he also eradicated every image of Senenmut at the same time. Now, I've speculated about this in the book. I have no proof for this, but my speculation is that he did this after Senenmut returned as Moses and emancipated his people and let them out. And that he then destroyed not only the statuary and the images of Hatshepsut, but also Senenmut, who had just taken his people out of Egypt. And so there's some very interesting stories and very interesting, what I would call historical coincidences. There is conjecture that I draw from that, and speculation I draw from that. But I think all of these things point to this guy more than probably being Moses, and that these are the people that were around him in the royal house at the time. And if you go all the way back to Joseph and look how he got there under the Hyksos, look at his a couple generations later, the Hyksos are driven out. You look at how the Israelites are enslaved because they were part of the Hyksos, if you will, the blood. They're very Egyptianized, I believe, by the time of the Exodus, and this is why you have people building gods to the golden calf, to Hathor, because she's an Egyptian god, and they're Egyptians. They're Hebrew by blood or Canaanite by blood, but they're all Egyptianized. There was one thing I was going to mention, too, that when his mother puts Moses in the basket and floats him down the Nile, I don't think this was in the big wide expanse of the Nile where he's going to get eaten by crocodiles. I think this is probably some of the channels that were built up around Memphis. There was the Grand Channel of the Pharaohs. There was all these little crisscrossing channels going everywhere. And they knew exactly where the princess was going to bathe because it was near the palace. I think they knew exactly the time of day she did it. I think also that Moses' mother, being thoroughly Egyptianized, knew all about the story of Osiris, who one of the Egyptian gods who had been cut in pieces and put in baskets and floated down the Nile, and then has his body resurrected and so on. People said, well, that's just a play off of the Osiris story, this Moses in the basket story. I beg to differ. I think it's the other way around. I think his mother, being very Egyptianized, knew the whole story of Horus and the basket and all that, and she was the one using the story of Osiris to get the attention of the Egyptian princess. That this was done, this is a gift from the gods, because it's told just like the Osiris story, and I think she used that story to bolster her cause. And there you go. So I think that there's a lot of fact out there that when you start stepping back and stop saying it has to all be fake and it all can't be real, you don't have to believe the faith story to believe that some of the historical events actually took place. And I think they've probably been embellished over the years. There's been legends that grown out of it, mythology that's come out of it. I get that part of it. But I also think that there's enough fact there that lends itself to saying this is real historical people that we're talking about.
How about certain miraculous things that happen or supposedly happen? It says they happen in the Bible. These things happen in the old Ten Commandments movie. For example, the plagues or the waters being parted and stuff like that. Do you feel that any of that could be historically accurate?
Well, what I feel is this, is that we try to sterilize things to be academic and say some of those things. I didn't even deal with the plagues that much in my book with John Ward. I said I'm going to leave that for a different discussion. I want to discuss the veracity of whether or not he existed as a historical figure. So to answer that question directly, I am one of those people, and I think John is too, where we are academic. Even though I don't have my degree, so I'm not an academician by exact definition, because I don't have an institutional degree, despite having 5 years of studied in institutions. I don't have that degree, so I'm not technically an academic, but I am an academic, self-acclaimed academic, let's put it that way. But as an academic, I've also got my feet in the other world, which knows for a fact that the paranormal, if you will, exists. The metaphysical is there. All the mysteries of the universe, those things exist. I've seen some of those things firsthand. I've been in Egypt and seen some of those things firsthand.
Oh, really?
And you can't deny it.
What happened?
It's a longer story. Suffice it to say this, is that at the tomb of Senenmut, I had it was there, and it was also at Saqqara, where the stepped pyramid of Dozier is. These two places, over the course of a week, I had something that I would call it a vision, even though I'm not given to believing in those things. Somebody came to me and said they had a vision. I'd be like, yeah, right. My BS can, that story goes into. But there are some people I do believe that do have these things. And I don't disbelieve in that sort of spirituality. I just think, like many people, especially Americans, we have discounted the spiritual side of the universe, the spiritual side of life. And in discounting that, it's very easy to poo-poo, if you will, anything that smacks of anything metaphysical or magical or spiritual. So when I was in Egypt, I had somebody not physically appear to me, but did physical things that manifested certain things, visions, information given to me, that I can't explain away, I can't write away, I can't deny happened. Although it's anecdotal, because it's my experience, and there was only one other person there to view some of this with me. And I was left with a very deep attachment, if you will. If you're into the paranormal, would describe it as a ghost or demonic or something that gets attached to somebody. I see it as something completely different. I had a man at Saqqara. It was shown in a vision and then told me by a medium who was there, was a dear friend of mine, who said there's a man, an ancient Egyptian man who's attached to you. And he said he will remain attached to you only when you're in Egypt. He'll never leave Egypt, but that he is attached to you, and he likes you because you think the way he thinks. And some ancient physician or something like that. It was very nebulous. We couldn't quite pinpoint what his duties were, but it was from ancient times, pre-18th dynasty, from what we got. Very, very ancient. And the same person appeared to me at the tomb of Senenmut, at the temple of Deir el-Bahri, of Hatshepsut's temple. And some things happened that aligned with a couple of other events that were going on in my life at that time. That it's too hard. It's so hard to talk around it. I'm trying to be quick, and I'm taking longer telling the story because I'm just trying to talk around it. I've told this story before, but let's back up about a month before I went to Egypt, a few weeks only before I went to Egypt. A good friend of mine passed away. You may know who he was. It was Philip Coppens. He was on the show Ancient Aliens. He had come and spoken at our Paradigm Symposium in October of 2012. And he had written the foreword for my book on the reptilians. And he died about 2 months after he spoke at the symposium of angiosarcoma, cancer of the heart, very rare. And he was gone from the time I saw him till the time he died, 2 months. And people who don't know who he is, if you ever watched Ancient Aliens back in their first few seasons, Philip Coppens was the Belgian guy with the long curly brown hair. He'd written many books. He wrote some books on the Kennedy conspiracies and things like that. But he passed away, and I remember it hit me very hard. It was December 30th was when he died. And I remember standing there in my home just weeping, and it was just dripping off my chin on the floor, and I thought, why in the hell am I reacting so intensely emotional about the death of this man? We were friends, yes, we weren't getting a cottage by the shore or anything like that, but we were good friends. And I thought, but I didn't cry this way when some of my own relatives died. I said, this is really peculiar that I'm acting this way. And it went on for days. And I later in the week got a call from a friend of mine who is a shaman. And you probably know who he is. And he's very well known. He's an author. And he said, Scotty, he says, you remember how I used to tell you that when I get messages from the spiritual side of the universe, he says sometimes it's in a book, or it's written, or it's something that happens, it's an event, or sometimes I hear an audible message, a disembodied audible message. He said, I was sitting here at my desk 15 minutes ago, and he said, I heard a voice that said, call Scotty. He says, so, what do you need? He said like that. And I said, it's interesting that you'd call. And I started relaying this thing that it just emotionally trapped me, this death of Philip Coppens. And because I was the first, I figured he's calling because of this. And I started weeping again. I couldn't even get through talking about it. And I said, why am I acting this way? And even my wife and a good friend of ours, Micah Hanks, was up here and visiting, and they both thought they were starting to get worried about me because of the way this was gripping me. And so my shaman friend told me, he said, I can't tell you all the reasons why what is what. He said, but I will tell you this. He says, go to Egypt. He says, you go to Egypt in 9 days. I remember him saying that. You're leaving in 9 days. He says, something's going to change your life dramatically there. And he said, just keep your eyes open. He said, that's all I'm going to tell you. And that's the only advice I have for you. And he says, and talk to me when you get back. And sure enough, I'm in Egypt, and it's about, 3 weeks after this conversation. And I'm standing at the tomb of Senenmut. And John was with me and his wife Maria. And we were down in kind of you can only call it like a ditch off the main road that's leading up to Hatshepsut's temple. And his tomb is down in there, Senenmut's tomb. And so we went down in there, and we were going to go get coffee, and John and Maria walked back up. I said, let me stick around down here for a minute. I want to take another picture of the tomb site. And so I'm standing there in the bright noonday sun in Egypt, in the sand, and I'm lighting a cigarette. That's how nonchalant this was. And I said out loud, I said, said, Senenmut, are you really Moses? And I said, Moses. And I'm talking out loud to the air. I said, Moses, are you really Senenmut? And I said, come on, guys. Are you guys one and the same? Did you really exist? And it was as if out of left field, it sounds so corny to say energy or force or something like that, but something hit me from just out of the left. Vroom! It was like having a strong gust just take you from the inside out. And I dropped my cigarette into the sand, and I started weeping. And for no reason. And again, it's dripping off my chin, off my goatee, and down into the sand. And it was just profuse weeping. And I remember I was flailing my hands in the air going, what the F? I yell out. I said, what is going on? Why am I crying? Because I was not even emotionally moved at the moment. I was lighting a cigarette, for God's sake, and we were looking it over, and I was like, so, are you really here? Is this who you were? And wham, and it hits me, and I have this weeping, and it took me a good 20 minutes to get over it, to be able to compose myself, to walk up out of there, climb up the steps, and and I saw John and Maria were talking to our guy who was our guide from the Ministry of Antiquities. That was the same day we went up to the cave up in the cliffside and saw the pornographic graffiti up there. And there's nothing like 3,500-year-old pornographic graffiti, by the way. That involves a pharaoh. And so I go back over to the ledge that looks down on the tomb, and I'm looking at the roof that's built over the entryway of the tomb. They actually call it the Polish bus stop over there, the archaeologists do, because it's this like 20-foot long roof that's about 8 feet wide and it peaks in the middle and runs. It looks like a bus stop. And the steps are underneath it to go down to the doorway to the tomb. And so I'm looking down at it, and I'm trying to regain my composure. And you know how your face gets when you just cry profusely. And here I am, a grown man, and so I'm wearing I've got my hat on, my fedora, and I hear footsteps in the rocky ground, and I think, oh, great. It's John, he's coming over. And I pull my hat down a bit over my eyes. And he goes, "So, brother, you ready to go get some coffee?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And I turned his way, and he goes, "Stop a second." He says, "You've been crying." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Look this way." And I looked over him, and he snaps a picture. And he says, "For posterity's sake, Scotty crying." And I said, "You're a dick." And, we had that nice little friendly exchange to lighten the mood. And so we talked about it. And then his wife walked over, Maria, and she's an archaeologist, and she's a PhD, and she says she's Swedish. She's a cute, little, gorgeous, frankly, Swedish woman with a beautiful accent. And she says, "Scotty," she says, "here I am an academic and a scholar." She said, "At home I am a witch." She said, "You go back down there and sit down and ask for clarity. John, come and let's get coffee." So I went back down for clarity. And hang on for a sec. Do you mind if I step away from my mic for a second?
Oh, yeah, by all means.
I want to get something. Fill in the dead air. I want to get something that I want to read you. Hold on, I'll be right back.
Yeah, absolutely.
You might be able to hear me across the room. I want to grab something out of my bookshelf over here.
And remember to stop by endofdaysradio.com for everything End of Days Radio. There you can get our schedule and plan around our live shows. So go to endofdaysradio.com.
Okay, I'm back. Let me get my headset back on. Sorry about that, and sorry to your audience for that bit of, we used to call that in radio, scintillating live radio. I have this little leather journal, and in its pages are little leaves and things and little bits and bobs I picked up along the way in Egypt. And here I have written what happened when I went back down there. Nothing earth-shattering, but this is my state of mind at the moment. I don't think I've ever read this to anyone, if I remember right. This is sitting in front of the tomb of Senenmut, and I have it dated, let's see. I have this dated February 4th, 2013. And it says, it's at tomb TT353, I have marked here. I am sitting in the sand outside the unused tomb of Senenmut. I stand in a thin little natural grotto, and I was overwhelmed with emotion, not sure precisely why. Tears, many tears. I'm not even sure if Senenmut is Moses. Not even so sure that Moses even exists as I was taught. But someone is here. Someone grabbed my emotions, and I don't want to let them go. And that's all I wrote that day. Because I wasn't sure what happened to me when I was standing there. And this was in the aftermath of it. And what makes this story even more interesting is about a month later when I was back home, I was talking to Philip Coppen's widow, and she was going to actually come and speak at our symposium in his place. We had decided the next year. And I was talking to her, and I said, "Say, I never told you how I felt about Philip's death." And I said, "I wanted to be very sensitive to you." And she said, "Please tell me." And I told her what had happened the day I learned he died, and the weeping and the call from my friend and the shaman and all that a couple days later. And as we were talking, I said, "Say, something else happened." I said, "Our friend, my shaman friend, told me that something in Egypt would change me profoundly." And I just happened to remember, and I'm talking to her, and I remembered that this incident, standing in front of Senenmut's tomb, and I said I was hit with this emotion, and I wept just like I did when Philip died. I said it was the same kind of thing. And she said, she said, "If you remember at the symposium, Philip and I told you that we might see you in Luxor because we were going to be there at the same time." And she said, "But of course he passed away December 30th, and we didn't go." And she said, "Do you know what we were working on?" She said, "We were working on a book about the relationship between Senenmut and Hatshepsut." And I said, "You got to be kidding me. That's extraordinary." She said, "Did you know, frankly, that Philip believed he was a reincarnation of Senenmut?" I said, "I did not know that." And she said, "And here you are. This happened to you at the tomb of Senenmut." She said, "What day was it?" And I picked up this journal I just read to you, and I gave her the date, February 4th of 2013. And she said, "My God," she said, "do you know what I was doing February 4th, what happened to me?" She said, "Philip's brother came to fill in on a tour we were doing in Scotland, and he and I were sitting that afternoon in the hotel in our room, and she said, Philip manifested himself physically in front of us." She said there was a physical manifestation, an apparition of Philip standing right in front of us.
Oh, wow.
And she said it lasted a second, and if I remember her story right, he moved something or something moved, and he vanished. And this happened at the very same moment that, or the same hour it appeared, it was over the noon hour in Egypt, the very same day that this was happening to her in Scotland. And what I will tell your listeners is this is my story, and I'm not given to fanciful tales. I'm not given to this stuff readily. I'm a very pragmatic kind of guy. I got to see it, touch it, taste it, handle it, talk to it, converse with it in order for me to believe in it.
Yeah, Scotty, I sorry to cut you off, but yep. I remember you, however long it was that we interviewed the first time and hearing you from other shows, you sounded like I wouldn't say completely different guy, but a little bit of a different person back then. I feel like I'm talking to somebody, I feel like I'm talking to a different guy almost.
Well, some things changed me, and some of the changes were profound. Some of them I think were so subtle that I don't notice them until they come up. But that particular event, I believe, is exactly what happened. I liken it to Moses' burning bush story. He was the only guy there, and he's going with his Tory, and so that was kind of my burning bush story. And what's interesting is that that same week, a few days prior, I had the vision at Saqqara. And Saqqara is the stepped temple. I'm sorry, the stepped pyramid of Dozier is there. And there's a courtyard adjacent to it, about the size of, think of like a soccer field. Only on both sides of the long sides of this field would be these rounded topped temples. And by rounded, I mean just cove top temples. And there's only two left standing, the rest are in rubble. And I was sitting on some of the rubble at the far end looking back with the pyramid of Dozier over my shoulder Really, literally could throw a rock and hit it. Over the back of my right shoulder, and I'm in front of this courtyard. And I saw it for an instant the way it would have looked thousands of years earlier. The courtyard was clean. The temples were all there instead of most of them in rubble. The shadows were slanting from the shadow of the temples, meaning it was late afternoon. There were torches lit in what we believed to be torch-holding things, for lack of the word at the moment. And walking toward me was a line of priests, shaved, bald, bare-chested, white kilt on, and they're holding trays with objects on them, and they're chanting. And I could smell incense on the breeze, and these chanting priests walked toward me, and about 20 feet away from me, they turned to my right in a straight line, and were still chanting and walking toward one of those, the little temples, which would be just, 20, 30 feet away. And then I opened my eyes, and, it was over. And my eyes had watered up. I wasn't crying, and I remember that happened first, and I was like, wow. It's like those chills you get that are so intense that your eyes water up. That's what my eyes were doing. And I said, that was interesting. And it was a year later when I was back there that Chris Conway, who's a good friend of mine, you may know him if you ever saw the Brit show Most Haunted, which was the one with all the screaming women all the time, and Derek Acora, and somebody who I've gotten to know pretty well is who was on that show, was the skeptic on that show, Dr. Kieran O'Keefe. And later in their seasons, they had a psychic medium who joined them, very kind of quiet young man, Chris Conway, Scottish, and he was their medium. Well, we got to know him pretty well, and he came on this trip with us the next year. We took 10, 11 people with us to Egypt to retrace that trip from the previous year. And he sat on that stone with me, and he's the one who identified there's this man from ancient Egypt that's attached to you, who's been attached with you since a year ago when you sat right here. And then he was later in the week is with me at Senenmut's tomb. And he said, your man is here, and he's offering you this and this. And it was actually things that linked John and I together in ways we didn't know we were linked in this very metaphysical sense. And so these are some of the things that happened to me when I was in Egypt that are of such strong spirituality, spirituality is the wrong word, spiritual import, that it has led me to say that while I'm fairly pragmatic kind of guy, and I scoff at a lot of stories I hear people tell, it's the skeptic in me. I've had stories that I cannot deny. Things happen to me that I can't deny. Things corroborate. There's so much more to this Senenmut thing, and Philip Coppens and the connections have gone off the wall since then with different things that have happened that have connected them up. And I think those were given to me, those actual events, to solidify for me that this did indeed really happen. And they were connected. So while I look for I want the cold hard fact, the academic fact, the historical record, the archaeological annals, I want those things because those are the solid things we can hang on to. Those are the things on which we can base something that is not just by, I'm believing this by faith, either faith in God or a faith in something other than God. And I hate living and believing things or working with things that I have to ascribe a faith to them as opposed to knowledge. And I want to know things. So this experience for me totally wiped out my need to know certain things because I knew in a different way. I may not be able to prove that experience ever happened to me or that it meant anything. Even some of my closest friends think it was a big emotional, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, that I dreamt it up out of my emotions. I know better. So I think that was the good thing that happened to me over there. And the thing is, there's so much more. The ancient historian Manetho said that Egypt is a land of gods, demigods, and spirits of the dead, and he said that 2,000 years ago. I think the same thing is true today. When I go over, and I spent a month with John and his wife at Gebel El Silsila, their archaeological site, and I went and their site spans about 20 miles square, both sides of the Nile, and their dig house was on a big boat, an old dahabeah that was about 100 years old, and I was in one of the cabins there and had my desk in my office all set up on the deck of the boat, overlooking the ruins at this site. And there were days I would just take my camera, and while they're working on the East Bank on something, on excavating and working and cataloging and things, I'm over on the West Bank, and I just wander the West Bank, going through all the monuments over there and taking pictures. And then there was one day I went over to the East Bank and wandered the East Bank and did all this. And there were days we went 13 miles out into the desert looking for something we spotted on Google Earth. And said that looks like a wall or a structure. And we'd go out, and sure enough, we found a wall. That was an ancient hunting wall. Things like that. And it was an amazing place. And the place, if you give yourself to it, very easily takes you over. There is so much there. It's embedded in the land and in the places. And as I said that, I just had a big clap of thunder outside my window.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Scotty, we are approaching the end of the interview, but what a way to end it. What a fascinating and very interesting story. Thank you so much for sharing that. And right now, I want to go ahead and just open things up a little bit. And if you have any last things you want to say to my audience, if you'd like to get on the soapbox a little bit one more time, feel free to do that. And also go ahead and follow that up with any plugs, appearances, anything at all that you'd like to promote or plug.
Sure. Well, I would just say, kind of in closing any of my remarks, is that I've always said this, and people say, what are the purposes for your books? And it's really to say, don't believe what somebody tells you, although there are some things we obviously need to be taught. But when it comes to things, belief systems, and it comes to faith, and it comes to all these things we're talking about, don't trust what somebody tells you. Go out and find out. And one of the big philosophies that's really hit me of late, that is, there's this great quote of Mark Twain's. And I've run into so many people who say, oh, I'd love to go to Egypt. Maybe I'll get to make it someday. I used to say that myself. And I've been several times now. It's not as hard as you might think. Politics are a little dicier nowadays, but it's not as hard as you think. And Mark Twain said something. I want everybody to listen to this very closely. You may have heard this before. It's a famous quote of his. Take this to heart. He said, 20 years from now, you will regret more the things you didn't do than the things you did do. So cast off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, explore, dream, discover. And Mark Twain said that. Sail away from the safe harbor, because 20 years from now, you're going to regret more the things you didn't do than the things you did do. Life, my philosophy of life has become, even though, yeah, I'm bogged down by things in life. I've got a wife. I've got 3 small children. I've got 3 grown children. I have to mow the grass. I have to work to pay my bills, keep the electricity on, and fix things around the house, yada, yada. I got all those stuff to do, just like anybody else. But I believe life wasn't meant for just those things. Life is meant to be lived and to be experienced. And my own daughters, my oldest daughters, my twins are 25 years old. I remember they were going to move to Hawaii with their business that they had started. And they called me in tears, and their mother and I were divorced, and their mom wasn't giving them much time a day on it and really discouraging it. And I said to my daughters, I gave them the same quote. I said, you're 25. I said, if you don't go do this now, you might not get another chance to do it. And 20 years from now, you might regret never having gone. I said, so go. I just had heart surgery in February, and it came on rather suddenly. And my two daughters flew up here, and they stayed in the hotel room with me for a week. And my one daughter had a trip planned to go to Iceland, and she wasn't going to go because I was in the hospital with heart surgery. And I said, you know what? I said, go. I said, because you know what? 20 years from now, one of two things is going to be true. I'm going to be alive. I'm going to be dead. You're going to be alive. You're going to be dead. I said, one of those things will be true for both of us. And I said, take the time. Do it now. I'm here. You know where I am. Your sister's here. I said, you go enjoy Iceland. How many opportunities do you get to go to Iceland? And so she almost reluctantly went, but I'm glad she went. So life for me, and I think that's maybe a message I would leave with, is life's supposed to be an adventure. It's not supposed to be a drudgery. It's not supposed to be the things that hold you down. Although those things do happen to us from time to time because they're meant to happen and we have to learn things from them. But don't ever turn your back on adventure, on something that is going to give you the experience that you might regret later that you didn't have. And I think that would be my message. And you can find anything there is to find out about me at my website. It's scottallenroberts.com. And Allen, I always have to spell it because there's 20 ways to spell Allen. It's A-L-A-N. So scottallenroberts.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scotty, for joining me tonight. And I definitely like to touch bases with you in the future and do it again.
Brother, thanks for having me. I sure appreciate it.
Awesome. And I will talk to you in the future. Until then, you have a good night.
And you too. Bye-bye.
Bye. And there you have it. That was Scott Allen Roberts. Very fascinating stuff. There's so much to go into with him because he's wrote 3 great books, and any one of those 3 could turn into a almost 2-hour-long interview like we just had right now. But I love Egypt, and I love the story of the Exodus, so I can't help but just really want to get into that stuff. I find it absolutely fascinating. I'm a big fan of that original 10 Commandments movie. I think that there's a lot of very classic scenery and a lot of very classic scenes in that movie. And I did not even know that they redid it. I think I saw a preview for that, what's it called, Exodus, Gods and Men or something like that. I saw a preview about it, but I probably figured it was about something totally different. So I'm probably going to go ahead and check that out at some point. And right now, we need to take a break, because I need to freshen up, I need to rest my vocal cords, and I need to shake my asleep buttocks back into working order. So why don't I go ahead and put on some music, and I will talk to you guys in about 10 minutes or so.
Raising consciousness and awakening mankind. This is End of Days Radio.
Welcome back to the End of Days. I am your host, Daniel, and you are listening to End of Days Radio at endofdaysradio.com, the greatest, most original, and most charismatic paranormal radio program on the airwaves today, with the best host of all time, much better than Nori. I'm just kidding, calm down. How are you guys doing? Are you ready for the wrap-up portion of our show? Remember, you can call in anytime during the show. Just give me 15, 20 minutes to start off with our guests. You can call in at 209-348-9810 or just add NinjaShoe777 on Skype. And you can call in and join in on the fun. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start off by reading a listener email. I'm not going to run super long today, or tonight, I should say. I have a lot to talk about, but it's not going to be a super duper long show. Or maybe it will be. We'll see what happens. So I'll go ahead and start us off. Let's see here. So remember, everybody out there, you can email me at danielenendofdaysradio@gmail.com. This first email is from Harry. He says, "Hey Dan, will Charles Manson ever be released from prison, and do you support his release?" That is an interesting question. Thank you, Harry, for writing in. Not sure why you're so interested in Mr. Manson, but I will go ahead and give my thoughts on that. Now, I've gone on YouTube and I've watched all of those Charles Manson videos, the one with Geraldo and the one with... Doesn't he get interviewed by some woman or something like that? There's a few of them. There's a few Charles Manson interviews floating around out there. And there are times in those interviews where he seems almost like he's been labeled a certain way. That's what he claims. He says, they said I was this, I was that, they labeled me a certain way. And I kind of see that perspective when I hear him talk about it enough and hear him talk about it at length. But as nice of a guy that Charles Manson can seem like in rare moments when he's coming across that way, the next second he'll be making faces or saying he's going to kill everybody or talking about some crazy stuff. So while he does have some moments where he seems like he might be a nice guy, he might be normal and fairly lucid, there are also moments in those interviews where he's making faces. He's saying that if he was responsible for murder, it would have been much worse. He's saying things like that. So I don't really know if it's a good idea to let him out. I can see why people would think, oh, why not just let him out for a few years before he dies? I get that argument. Like, I mean, it happened back in the 60s, so he can't go and have a couple years of living in the outside, a completely different world before he dies. It seems like a humane thing to do, right? But he committed a very horrible crime, and he has to pay his tribute to society. He has to pay back society. He can't just get a free pass, no matter how many people out there think that Charles Manson is cool or they think he's an icon of the 60s, which he is. But no matter how many people out there support him or would love to see that, it's not those people that decide whether or not he gets to go out there. How do we know he's not going to just do the same thing, right? I mean, it would take him how many minutes before he's got a new band together or a new group of stragglers, and he's looking to do the same thing, ride around in a bus, be like a mentor, a cult leader to these young people, and then they'll go and kill somebody again, right? It's just going to happen exactly the same way. And the reason I know that is because I know that there's a bunch of sick people out there that to this day they still look up to Charles Manson and they would still follow him. There are people out there like that. Wasn't one of those girls that was following him, isn't she still totally in love with him and she would probably do it again? So it's probably best for everybody if he just stays inside a prison. That's where he's lived most of his life. It's what he's used to. He's insane. to say the least. He's safe in there, and everybody else is safer with him in there. I do think it's a little dumb that people compare him to a serial killer, because he was never really a serial killer or anything like that. He was just this iconic, crazy beatnik, hippie, cult leader type guy. He wasn't a serial killer or anything like that. And I do find it fascinating, his connection to the Beatles, the Beach Boys, to the Hollywood circles. And I also find the conspiracy-related stuff surrounding his life extremely fascinating. I want to get more into that. We've had people like Neil Sanders come on here and talk about Charles Manson. There's been other guests that have talked about Charles Manson. David Charles Plate, I think, got into it a little bit. But I want to go even deeper into the story of Manson, because there's so many things about that story that just don't add up. Like, supposedly there was this sex tape floating around with a bunch of famous actors and actresses in it, and somehow it's connected to the murder. There's crazy stuff like that going on. What we know isn't what really happened, basically, like many other things. But that's my take on that. And we will get more into the story of Charles Manson into the future. I'll look around and see if I can't find a good author who's written a book on the subject or something like that. And if you have any ideas for guests, or if you want to see this show go in any particular direction, email me, Daniel, endofdaysradio@gmail.com. You got that? Okay, awesome. And with your feedback, don't ever feel like you need to sugarcoat what you're saying. Don't feel like you ever need to hold back. Just tell me like it is. Tell me like it is. I'm a grown adult. Whatever sort of issues you have, I'm sure that I can handle. So you don't have to sugarcoat your words. Don't worry about me getting angry or anything like that. Just tell me the truth. Tell me like it is. Be real. Keep it real. Remember, people used to always say that all the time? Oh, I'm just keeping it real. Well, now I know what that actually means. It means to keep it real and not be fake and not sugarcoat things or twist things because you care about what people think or you care about what this or that person thinks. No, we should all keep it real. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about 7-Eleven. I know what you're thinking. Why in a million years would you be talking about 7-Eleven? Well, there are a few reasons why I like 7-Eleven. For one thing, it tends to be cleaner than most other gas stations. So that's number one. I don't know if that's because it's a corporation or what. The other thing is that they have the best hot dogs out of any gas station or any fast food place or anything like that. Where can you get a hot dog like you can get at 7-Eleven any time of the day? Where can you go in and get a big, fat, greasy, spicy bite or a big bite? You know what I'm talking about? Those big hot dogs that they have out there on the hot dog burners, the little spinny rack things that they have, and they have a spicy bite on there, a big, fat, spicy hot dog. And you just raise your hand, you say, can I get one of those? And they put it on, or no, they hand it to you, they put it on a bun and they hand it to you, and then you go put your condiments on it. And it's so quick. It's like, takes like 10 minutes to do all that. And it's so cheap. It's like less than $5. But I'm not going in there because it's cheap. It has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with status. I'm not going in 7-Eleven and getting those hot dogs because they're cheap. I'm going in there because I want to be there. Because in there is the spicy bite. And that's what I want. So I will drive from my house across town to go to 7-Eleven, get my spicy bite and my Mountain Dew, and I will drive home. That's it. I'm not going to 7-Eleven because I'm on the way somewhere else or because I'm at work. I'm going there to get my spicy bite because I love hot dogs. Also, pretty soon, I am probably going to go on some type of vacation. I'm not going to have a ton of time, so I know a lot of you out there are thinking, oh, I'm going to ask Daniel to come out here, or I'm going to see if he wants to go to Disney World or something like that. And I don't mean to tell you not to throw those suggestions at me. It's just that I have a small amount of time to plan this out, and I want to really make the most of it, and I want to do something paranormal related. I want to go someplace that is really going to scratch that itch that I got. You know, that itch that I got where I just want to keep exploring and I want to keep getting smarter and obtaining new information and increasing my awareness and all those things. I want to really scratch that itch. I want to get deep down in there and just scratch it, right? So that means that I have to be very careful how I plan this out. I don't know exactly where I want to go, but it should be somewhere with a little scariness, a little... I don't know. I don't know what I want to do. I might go to one of these famous UFO hotspots. Like they have this thing in Eastern Washington. I think that's where it's at. It's called ECETI or CSETI. There's so many of them nowadays. But supposedly if you go there, you can see some UFOs and stuff. Knowing me, I'll probably just not see anything and end up punching somebody in the face. But who knows? I might see a UFO. I might punch an alien in the face. I might get punched in the face by an alien. I might get raped by an alien. Seems to happen to a lot of people, doesn't it? You're out in the woods alone, smelling all purty. Next thing you know, you're paralyzed, and you're in a ship, and you got all these big, bulbous black eyes staring at you. It's not quite what I'm looking for in a vacation. But I have to admit, the UFO hotspot thing is in the lead. I mean, I'm kind of too old to go to Disneyland. Plus, I believe Disney is like mind control stuff. So I don't really want to go to Disneyland. And then there's other places like New York City and Texas. I'm not going to Texas. Just simply because the North won the Civil War and that's it. There's no reason for me to go there. They lost. I'm just kidding. All you Southerners out there, don't kill me. I'm just joking. I know you hate when I bring up the Civil War. Just like you British fans out there hate when I bring up the Revolutionary War. And I know you North Korean fans hate when I bring up Kim Jong-un. I know you don't like that, but I'm just trying to talk the truth. So I apologize if I'm ever offending anybody. I know that there's at least 2 people in North Korea that like the show. And when they listen to it, they are breaking all kinds of laws. They might even get me killed by listening to the show in that country. And that's something that we cannot afford. What else is going on? Oh, I did want to say fuck cancer. I've noticed that a lot of people on social media and on TV and other various outlets are saying fuck cancer. And I've wanted to get involved with a charity for a while, like have some kind of charity that this show can be associated with. But I realize that that's probably not even necessary. If I just say fuck cancer every so often, that's probably good enough because I'm bringing awareness to cancer and the fact that we don't like it and we're trying to find ways to get rid of it or stop it from happening. So I think if we just say fuck cancer every once in a while, that's going to raise our awareness of cancer. That's the whole point. That's why people say fuck cancer. I'm not the guy that thought of this. I'm just perpetuating it. So that's going to be the charity that I deal with from now on is fuck cancer. Why don't we say fuck AIDS while we're at it? Or fucking can lead to AIDS? No, that's not right. Let's just leave AIDS out of it. Who even knows if AIDS is real? I've been reading some stuff. Some conspiracy stuff. So I'm not sure if it's real anymore. It might be a hoax. It might be a hoax like Santa Claus. We all believed in Santa Claus at some point, didn't we? And look what happened. We stopped believing in Santa Claus. Something that we thought was real, we realized was not real. It happens all the time. Okay. I've got another letter to read. This one comes from a lady named Sharon. She says, Daniel, why are you doing the devil horn sign on Twitter in a selfie? Are you a Satanist now? ? Why, Sharon, why would I be a Satanist when I'm always covering Satanism and Illuminati, satanic conspiracies and stuff like that? Why would I become a Satanist? That's ridiculous. Think about what you're asking me. You're being one of those people that sees like one little thing that's off and starts labeling it as Satan or evil or this or that. Like you see some kid wearing black and you figure he's with the devil or something. You're overreacting. I did the devil sign on Twitter because I like heavy metal. And that devil sign has been associated with heavy metal for a very long time. It's not because I'm a Satanist. It's because I enjoy the art and the atmosphere of heavy metal music. There's a big difference between liking heavy metal and being a Satanist. Do you really think I'm harming somebody by doing that goofy symbol? I'm doing it right now while I'm talking. I'm doing it. Oh, I'm doing it with both hands. I'm doing it with my toes. And nothing bad is happening. So please, get over your superstition. I mean, come on. Are you really still stuck in that paradigm? It's 2014. No, it's 2017. Do you realize how far into the future we are and you're worrying about me doing devil horns on Twitter? I mean, really? It's just a form of expression, people. Don't worry about stuff like that. Worry about paying your electric bill. Worry about your daughter becoming pregnant. Worry about your dog needing to go to the vet. But don't worry about Daniel. I got people that worry about me. I worry about myself. So keep me in your heart. Keep me in your dreams. But don't worry about me becoming a Satanist. Okay, Sharon, if that's your real name. What's that supposed to be? Sharon Osbourne? Sharon. Thanks for writing, Sharon. I do appreciate it. And continue to be real with me. If there's something that's rubbing you the wrong way, something you don't like, shoot me an email. That's daniel@endofdaysradio@gmail.com. Daniel, endofdaysradio@gmail.com. You got that? Okay. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is vibration. And when I say vibration, I'm referring to your vibration. In a way that kind of means your mood, in a way that it has to do with your aura, it has to do with your body's energies, your mood. When you're in a happy-go-lucky mood, when the future looks positive, when things are fun and interesting, that means you're in a positive vibration. If you're depressed, low energy, you're having a lot of negative self-deprecating thoughts, you feel angry, quick to anger, that means that you are in a state of low vibration. And most of the time we're somewhere in the middle. It's probably good to be in the middle because you are aware, but at the same time you're not sunk so low that you're getting depressed and you're not low energy. But really you want to get your vibration as high as possible because that's when you're functioning at your best. That's when you're, while being in the middle, there's probably something to be said about that. I mean, I wouldn't want to run into a guy in an alley who has a low vibration. He'd probably kick my butt because he's so angry. So maybe there's a time when it's good to have a low vibration. But for the most part, you want to have a high vibration because that's when you get the most done. When you're in that state, you can work the hardest and you have the most fun. And the work doesn't even feel like work because you are in the zone. You are flowing with the timeline. You are doing exactly, if you believe in God, you are doing exactly what God put you on the earth to do. It's one way to know if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, if your vibration is high. If you don't feel good, something's not right. You're doing something wrong. You're in the wrong place. It's time to make a change. And sometimes that means getting your compass pointed in the right direction. It means figuring out what you have to do to get back to that positive place. And it happens to everybody. It happens to me. It happens to everybody. You think you got it figured out. You're going. And then you suddenly realize that, no, you do not have it all figured out. Something's wrong. You need to make some kind of change. And every awakening experience leads to more awakening experiences. And there's that sign. How does it go? The dawn comes after the darkest night or something like that. I really botched that. That was horrible. But you guys know what I mean. Eventually the sun rises again. There's always a silver lining. How about that? It's a little more cliche, but I think it works. So do what you got to do to keep your vibration up. If you're not happy, you have every right to be happy. You don't have to stay in some low status in your workplace, in home, in school, if people aren't treating you good. don't ever accept that. Don't ever let anybody put you in your place, tell you what your status is. Don't ever do that. Because if you do that, they will just push you to the lowest point and you will stay there. So never let anybody pigeonhole you. Never let anybody force any sort of status on you. Remember that you are a god at all times, or a goddess, depending on your gender, or a trans goddess. Oh, yeah. A trans goddess. Even better. Okay, so got through all that stuff. One thing I did want to add, one thing that does get my vibration up is playing the guitar. That's one of the reasons why I'm probably getting so into guitar. Because when I play and I get in the zone, I feel great. In fact, it feels like, excuse me, I'm burping on a hot dog. It feels like there's a place that you can get to where your fingers just start moving on their own, where reality around you all of a sudden feels more smooth and buttery, and you just feel this energy. You're in the zone, and you're making awesome music, and it's like it's just coming from somewhere else. That is an awesome experience. And the more things like that you can do and that you have in your life, those things will actually pull up your vibration. So anything that's fun, engaging, that you're passionate about, that's something inside of you telling you that you're supposed to be doing that. That's why it feels good. And not everything that feels good is going to be the right way to go. I mean, shooting up heroin probably feels great, but that doesn't mean you're in a good place. You got to know what to look for. You got to know what feelings are good and which ones are quick and easy, feeling really shitty later. You got to know what is going to take you where you need to go. And I think things like sports and hobbies and stuff like that is generally the right direction. If you're an artist, if you like to draw, well, you know what you're supposed to do with your life. And that could change too, so who knows? So keep that stuff in mind. Don't ever do what other people want you to do. God, that's the main thing. Do what you want to do. Be your own person. Be a god of your own sphere. Be the director of your own life. I know I probably go into this positive thinking, self-empowerment stuff too much, but so what? It's what we need if we're ever going to break out of this matrix. We need to be strong individually. We need to be independent. We need to listen to our hearts instead of the dictators or the priests or the school teachers or whatever authority figure is there feeding us bullshit and threatening us if we don't go along with the program. Fuck the program. Fuck the matrix. Fuck the program. Fuck the police. No, I don't mean to say that. Police are our friends. They protect us. But fuck them, right? No. You know what? I have a cousin that's a cop now. I better not say that. That could be bad juju. I believe in juju. And again, this letter asking me to tell my assassination story. I'm going to have to hold off on that. I do want to tell it, but I just don't really feel like doing it right now. My mouth is getting dry, and it's a long story, and I want to tell it good. And this show has already been good. That was an amazing interview, and I'm amazing, and you're amazing. And the stuff that we like is amazing. This paranormal stuff, it's amazing. It is. I mean, why do people want to listen to shows about this and not shows about equestrian horseback riding? It's because equestrian horseback riding is only going to be relevant and popular to like 5 people that are into that. Everybody else doesn't give a crap about that. But paranormal is something that everybody can enjoy. Anybody out there can enjoy the paranormal world. Anybody and everybody. So take that for what it's worth. And I do have a new segment that I've been trying to introduce like every day. I've been trying to get going on this, but for whatever reason, I keep forgetting. But this is a new segment for the show. We're changing the format again just a little bit. We're not really changing it. We're just adding a new segment to the end of the show. And I'm going to call this segment the mind-blowing moment of the day, because that's what we like to do here on End of Days Radio. We like to blow minds. And some of you out there like to blow other things, but we won't talk about that. But this is a new segment called Mind-Blowing Moment of the Day. And I've already chosen that moment for today, for this first ever End of Days Radio Mind-Blowing Moment of the Day. I've already chosen it. And that is the experience that Scotty Boy, he shared with us, his spiritual experience in Egypt. That is what I'm going to label the mind-blowing moment of the day for this episode on July 17, 2017. It blew my mind, and it almost made me tear up a little bit. So that moment wins the award for today. And we're going to keep doing this segment, unless I forget, which does happen. But it's probably not going to happen because I did it. And once I did it, I'm usually good. Once I do something once. And remember, all of you out there, if you want to call into the show, you can. Or just write me an email. Some of you are shy. You don't want to call in. You'd rather just have me read your email on air. That's fine. I do enjoy reading your emails. But, hey, that's pretty much what I've got for today. We do have another show coming up on the 26th. That's going to have Kenneth and Fair Deal on it, the Catholic demonologist. I had to call Kenneth on the phone. It was yesterday. I mean, usually I just, exchange emails, text messages, or whatever, talk to people on Skype, but he wanted me to call. So I gave him a call, and it's just so weird to me. Like, here, it's Sunday morning, and the first thing I have to do is call a demonologist. How strange my life has become. Gonna call a demonologist, gonna go pick up some eggs, bake a cake, do a little grilling. Oh, I've been doing so much grilling lately. Oh, God. Some of you have seen my pictures on Twitter, right? The kebabs I made, or the hamburgers, or the... what else did I make? All kinds of stuff. I've been barbecuing like crazy. And next, I'm probably going to want to do fish. I'm thinking barbecuing some salmon sounds good. I just don't want to scorch it or burn it. That's the problem that I've been having, is sometimes I'll burn my food. I'm not quite a master griller yet, but I'm getting there. I use wood. I don't use the old-fashioned charcoal briquettes, and I don't use butane. I use wood because wood is good, and it doesn't make your food taste and smell like blacktop or cigarettes, but it also has way more flavor than butane, or propane. Butane, propane. That's the same thing, right? I don't know. Wood is good. Wood is how the cavemen did it, and that's how Daniel does it, because he is a caveman. He's an old school caveman. He's the type that will hit a mountain goat over the head with a rock, drag it back to his cave, chop it up, and grill it. Yeah, I'm a real man. That's right. Yeah, this is my real man voice. This is my real man voice from a brand new day. Yeah, this is my real man voice. Oh, what should I do next? Eat a pepperoni stick? Smoke a cigarette, eat a pepperoni stick, take a big old fat shit, a big old fat painful shit, eat some hot dogs from 7-Eleven. Shit gotta come out at some point. What the hell am I even talking about? I'm sorry, I don't know what just happened. Let's close things up. Let's close things off. Let's end the show. Remember, if you like End of Days Radio, go to endofdaysradio.com. Subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube. Follow me on Twitter, that's at Ninja Shoes. Remember, like me on Facebook at TheRealEndOfDaysRadio.com, Facebook.com/TheRealEndOfDaysRadio. Remember to like me. If you want to donate to the show, help me keep the lights on, help keep the server up, just go to endofdaysradio.com and click donate. You can donate through PayPal. Appreciate it very much. And if you like listening to the live show, go to endofdaysradio.com. Check out that schedule. It's listed under upcoming guests, and then you know when to attend the live show. And you can get us on the TuneIn Radio app. Just search EODR. It's just EODR in capital letters. There's no logo or anything like that. That is me. That is Daniel. That is the DA and the all American man. the DAN, the All American Man. You can get me at endofdaysradio.com. Connect with me on Twitter. Add me on Skype. You can check me out on the astral plane. On the astral plane, I actually look like the Violator, from the Spawn comics. So if you see a huge scary demon, that's actually me. I'm just kidding. Don't go near that thing. I don't know what it is. But I had fun tonight. I hope you had fun, and we will have more fun next time, because fun is what I'm all about. Fun. F-U-N. Fun. P-O-T. Pot. Wait, what? Anyways, I will talk to you all next time from the Broken Ruins, from Seattle, Washington. This is the End of Days, and I am Daniel. Good night, everybody.
Winter's coming.
The king has returned from the broken ruins of Babylon. This is